Chapter 6 The Nicotine Trick Smoking's Greatest Secret Finally Revealed, Part 2 Withdrawal. You may wonder why I've started a completely new section in this book in order to continue the explanation of what happens when you smoke. The reason for this is that smoking has, quite literally, nothing to do with physical pleasure, as you're about to see. As any major scientific report will confirm, even in tiny doses, nicotine is a powerful stimulant. But if this is true, why do so many smokers believe the exact opposite, that smoking relaxes them? To find the answer, we need to go all the way back to the moment your affair with cigarettes started. About an hour after you smoked your first ever cigarette, your body started to feel a growing sensation of physical tension caused by the delayed effects of nicotine on your nervous system. This reaction caused your chest to tighten slightly, as well as your face muscles and the diaphragm between your chest and stomach. You know this sensation by another name, withdrawal symptoms. I've heard people describe this sensation as being similar to an itch or physical aggravation or even hunger, but it's actually much more specific than that. When your body first experienced this sensation, your subconscious mind did exactly what it's always done. It matched it against all the memories of when you had the same physical sensation in the past. It immediately found a perfect match: fear. You might be surprised by this. Most smokers don't remember feeling consciously frightened after their first cigarette. But don't forget that fear ranges from mild anxiety all the way up to blind panic. So let me be absolutely specific about what you felt. Remember our woman with the dog phobia. You felt exactly as she would if she saw a dog 200 yards in the distance. It wouldn't be close enough to cause an immediate panic attack, but it would be just enough to make her feel uneasy and anxious. That's how your subconscious mind started to feel after your first cigarette: uneasy and anxious. Here's what happened next. Your subconscious mind couldn't figure out why you felt anxious or uneasy, because it couldn't see any obvious threat, so it simply sat there feeling slightly uncomfortable and worried. Now let me tell you something you probably don't know. Around the same time that you started smoking, millions of other people also smoked a single cigarette and have never been tempted to smoke again ever since. Here's why. They smoked one cigarette, realized that it made them feel uneasy and physically tense, and simply didn't want another. About 4 days afterwards, this background feeling of tension completely faded away, without them even consciously noticing it, and their subconscious minds were completely calm again. The overwhelming majority of these people will never have the slightest urge to smoke again, because their subconscious minds now have a perfect memory of what the cigarette did. It made them feel anxious and uncomfortable, starting about an hour after smoking it. Their subconscious minds also realize that there is nothing whatsoever to be gained by smoking another cigarette, because they got absolutely no pleasure from the one they smoked. They diced with death and got lucky, nothing more. The trick explained. But you weren't so lucky. Let me explain why. You decided to give smoking another chance and smoked a second cigarette, which, predictably enough, started the entire process all over again, beginning with a mild feeling of tension. But because this feeling had been steadily growing stronger ever since you finished the first cigarette, setting the whole process back to the beginning made it feel as though the second cigarette had relieved this sensation of tension. In actual fact, it didn't do any such thing. It simply started this sensation building up all over again. But because your body's reaction to nicotine begins with only a very low level of tension, it felt like smoking the second cigarette had made you feel relaxed. And because this feeling of chemical tension had sneaked up on you so gradually in the first place, your mind was already starting to forget that this sensation didn't even exist before you smoked the first cigarette. Imagine your body's reaction to nicotine as a feeling of mild physical tension that slowly rises in a curve, reaches a peak, and then gradually falls away, which is precisely what it does. Just before you lit your second cigarette, you were on your way up this curve without consciously being aware of it. By smoking your second cigarette, you effectively pressed a restart button that sent you back to the beginning of the curve. But because you were already part of the way up the curve caused by the first cigarette, going back to the beginning automatically meant you were suddenly feeling a lower level of tension as a direct result of smoking a cigarette. What you didn't know was that smoking the second cigarette simply started this climb all over again. If you had left it alone, you would have reached the top of the curve after a few hours, and the feeling of tension would have simply died away after about 4 days, as millions of other people have discovered after smoking a single cigarette. But by smoking your second cigarette, you simply delayed the inevitable, and that's all you've done with every cigarette you've smoked ever since. The simple truth is, once your body's reaction to nicotine starts, other than death, there is no way of fast-forwarding to the end of it. Your body doesn't work like that. Of course, you can easily jump back to the beginning by smoking, or you can simply let it run its natural course by not smoking, but you can never jump past the middle bit. But you've never known this, and this lack of knowledge is why you've been pressing the restart button ever since, causing the feeling of tension to restart again at a lower, less frightening level. Unfortunately, it gets worse, because the feeling of tension caused by nicotine feels absolutely identical to the feeling of tension caused by genuine fear. From the moment you smoked your second cigarette onwards, your subconscious mind made another serious mistake. It started telling you to smoke, not just when you were experiencing the fake chemical fear caused by the delayed effects of nicotine, but whenever you really were genuinely scared or stressed. This is why, in an office full of people, even a mild crisis will cause every smoker to want to light up in unison. This is also why every airport contains bars full of chain smokers. This is why people chain smoke outside hospitals, at funerals, in betting shops, and everywhere people are likely to be stressed. It has nothing to do with getting pleasure or being cool or sociable. The subconscious minds of every one of those people have been tricked by the chemical properties of nicotine, tricked into believing that smoking a cigarette calms genuine stress simply because it resets something that feels similar, the tension caused by the nicotine in the previous cigarette. But smoking doesn't reduce genuine stress in the slightest, which is why smokers are always forced to chain smoke when they're scared or stressed, wondering why each cigarette is somehow failing to kick in. They're trapped inside a nightmare caused by nothing more than the bizarre chemical properties of nicotine. But it gets worse still, because your brain has gradually developed a tolerance to nicotine. Every cigarette you now smoke is having less and less effect on the tension caused by the previous cigarette, so your subconscious mind has been getting more anxious and stressed each time you've smoked. In fact, even if you only smoked a cigarette 30 seconds ago, your body is already starting to become stressed from nicotine. However, you're now so used to feeling like this that you think you feel normal, but you'll only feel normal again when your body is completely free of nicotine. Let me tell you something. If you smoke cigarettes every single morning of your life, you wake up with a feeling of mild tension in your face, shoulders, stomach, and chest. That feeling has become so familiar to you that it now feels normal. But if you were to look into a mirror before smoking your first cigarette of the day, you'd see fear and anxiety in your eyes. This fear is caused by the fact that your body feels chemically frightened by nicotine, and your subconscious mind wants you to make it go away as soon as possible. Ask yourself this. Did you feel anxious 20 times each day before you started smoking? Did you feel anxious during visits to the pub or at weddings or playing pool or watching television? Did you feel anxious after sex? Did you feel anxious after a nice meal or with a glass of wine? Of course you didn't. And that's why you need to keep telling yourself and everyone else that you enjoy smoking, because the alternative is to accept an unspeakable, horrific thought that your subconscious mind is now anxious even during the best moments of your life. The depressing truth is that your subconscious mind has been increasingly anxious ever since the moment you started your doomed affair with cigarettes. There's been a shadow over you the entire time, even while you've been asleep. You've simply got so used to the continual background feeling of chemically induced anxiety that, to keep your sanity, you've been forced to keep telling yourself that cigarettes must somehow be pleasurable. Now ask yourself another question. How many times have you blamed the feeling of tension known as withdrawal symptoms on smoking, rather than on not being able to smoke? Probably never. Like every smoker, your brain somehow sees this sensation as being a consequence of not smoking, rather than what it really is, a delayed reaction to the nicotine in the last cigarette you smoked. Why do you think you've never made this connection? The answer is the timing. When you smoke a cigarette, it takes only a few seconds for the nicotine to reset the physical tension to a lower level, but it takes an hour or so for this tension to build up all over again. The fact that this feeling of chemically induced tension is a delayed reaction means that your subconscious mind, quite understandably, fails to see it as the direct result of smoking a cigarette. Even the phrase withdrawal symptoms suggests that you suffer not as a result of smoking, but as a result of not being able to smoke. You automatically assume you feel this way because you've not smoked the next cigarette yet, but you've got it the wrong way round. You feel this way because you did smoke the previous cigarette and you're now feeling the delayed effect of it. Have you ever had toothache and deliberately pushed the tooth with your finger so that it hurt twice as much, just so that you could release it and relieve the pain slightly? Children sometimes do this instinctively. The point is, when you stop pushing, the pain is no better than it was to start with, but it's better than it was when you were pushing, so it almost feels like genuine pleasure when you take the pressure off. This is exactly what happens when you smoke, but with fake chemical anxiety rather than actual pain. You're directly inflicting the sensation known as nicotine withdrawal symptoms on yourself, but because it's a delayed reaction, it somehow doesn't feel like that, does it? In fact, because a cigarette briefly reduces the existing feeling of tension caused by nicotine before causing it all over again, your brain sees a wrong picture of what's happening and is, quite simply, tricked into reaching the wrong conclusion. It's called the nicotine trick. Understanding withdrawal symptoms. The widespread perception that withdrawal symptoms are somehow the result of depriving your body of something it wants is a fatal misunderstanding of what nicotine really does. It suggests that nicotine is almost a beneficial substance, rather than what it actually is, a lethal poison that causes a delayed stress reaction when taken in tiny doses and almost certain death when taken in larger doses. So why don't most smokers see withdrawal symptoms as the result of smoking a cigarette? Why does this sensation always seem to be viewed as something you get when you stop smoking, but at no other time? After all, wouldn't you agree that the effects of any drug include everything which happens from the moment the drug is taken until the point where the person is back to the state they were in before they took the drug? Surely you can't just concentrate on what happens in the first 5 minutes and then pretend that what happens an hour later is being caused by some unknown, mysterious force from outer space. But this is exactly what smokers are tricked into doing with withdrawal symptoms, and this is why the first thing you need to do is to acknowledge what smoking a cigarette does. Smoking a cigarette directly causes a delayed sensation of physical tension. Your last cigarette directly caused a delayed sensation of physical tension. Your next cigarette will directly cause a delayed sensation of physical tension. You can't blame a hangover on not drinking. It's caused by drinking. You can't blame indigestion on not eating. It's caused by eating. You can't blame withdrawal symptoms on not being able to smoke. They are caused by smoking. And yet the effects of smoking are often presented to smokers in such an incredibly twisted way that millions of people have been prevented from seeing the real picture. In fact, a more accurate name for nicotine withdrawal symptoms would be, quite simply, delayed nicotine symptoms. Think about it. You can't possibly get this feeling of chemical tension by not smoking unless you've recently smoked. Where else do you think these so-called symptoms come from? The moon? Neptune? The Twilight Zone? No, they come from smoking. If a non-smoker decides that he's never going to smoke a cigarette, does he immediately get withdrawal symptoms as a result of the decision not to smoke? Does his chest tighten? Do his face muscles become tense? Of course not. You can't get this feeling by not smoking. You get it by smoking. This also means that the only way to get what your subconscious mind really wants, the end of the fake stress caused by nicotine, is to not smoke. That way, it's gone in a few days. All you need to do is make your subconscious mind see this. But isn't this difficult? Surely your subconscious mind does what it wants. How do you know it's even listening? Well, we'll talk about that in a few seconds. But first, it's time for you to make a decision. It may be unexpected, but you're ready. Here it is. You are never going to smoke another cigarette in your life. From this second onwards, you are already a non-smoker. Let me repeat that. You are never going to smoke another cigarette in your life. From this second onwards, you are already a non-smoker. I'm lying. Smoke whenever you want. I just made you feel anxious and uncomfortable, didn't I? I just made some hidden part of you fight against what I was telling you, even though you think you want to stop smoking. That part of you is your subconscious mind, and it's been listening to everything I've been saying. It just reacted the way it did because it perceived my statement as a direct threat to you. It's trying to protect you from me because it's still in the grip of the nicotine trick. The truth is, at this second in your life, your subconscious mind still doesn't want you to stop smoking, and I've just proved it. I've also demonstrated the real reason why you're so convinced it's difficult to stop smoking, because your subconscious mind keeps reacting exactly like it just did a few seconds ago. But what if you could find a way to stop it doing this? Would you still have cravings to smoke? The answer is no. In fact, if you can somehow find a way to stop your subconscious mind reacting in this way, you'll be removing the only barrier to instantly becoming a non-smoker. And I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. The subconscious belief that smoking is the solution to anxiety rather than the cause of it is the twisted deception known as the nicotine trick. But a trick is still a trick, and an illusion is still an illusion. And this is why the last cigarette you smoked didn't satisfy you. This is why the next cigarette will always be followed by the one afterwards. You will never, ever find the cigarette that will permanently satisfy you, because it's cigarettes that are causing you to feel stressed.